Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, we're talking Chelsea. The Blues lose 3-0 to Brighton, but how did their season get derailed? Spurs come out on top of United in a festival of incompetence. Have we learned anything from this matchup? And Arsenal using Mikel Merino as striker. Can this propel them back into the title race? We'll find out on today's episode. So we're back for another episode, another roundup of the weekend's football. And just before we get into our discussion, I want to say, please do stick around for the B-roll today. We're doing something different. We're teasing a future project. I think it'll be really interesting for all of you. So please do make sure that you stick around for that. And joining me for this episode and joining me for the B-roll, of course, is Ted Knutson. It's good to see you, Ted. How are you doing?
Hello. Oh, we should announce that we've sort of made some hires for the Wednesday show and also when I'm gone too. So congratulations. We're keeping both Neil and Hayden around. And actually, we had 3 good candidates. So Jose was also excellent. We may try and bring him back for specific La Liga times and Madrid times. But yeah, we wanted to give some alternatives, some different takes. Hayden obviously has a long history, he's young, but he's got a decent history in football analytics and working in the industry. And then Neil was like just super educated about everything. So you guys had good things to say about both of them, and you'll continue to see them on kind of alternating weeks around here.
Yeah, we really appreciate your feedback during that process. That's really good. We obviously want to deliver to you guys what you guys want to see. And yeah, we're really excited about the direction that this can take the podcast over the rest of the season and the season after that. But today, Ted, it's you and me, the OGs, Chelsea Football Club. We've been avoiding them for a while. We talked about them in the autumn and we got kind of a lot of shit about it because we weren't really that critical, but we said we have reservations. Okay, there's stuff that we're waiting to see. And then they had a horrible festive period. They're now down to 6th. And while Forest are the worst of the teams above them, Forest have the biggest points advantage. Then there's Bournemouth and City, who I think you'd say are at least as good as Chelsea this season. So this 3-0 loss to Brighton was super damaging, but it's been a damaging couple of months.
This loss was awful. let's put it that way. Because 8 shots, none on target. It was possibly their worst match of the year. Now it took an exquisite touch and goal from Matoma to open it up, but the other ones were not amazing. And we're finally at the point where before it was, much like Spurs and other teams this year, there are some injuries with Chelsea, but they have the biggest squad. They just have the biggest squad. And you can't blame everything on that. And there were signs earlier in the year that these are things we want to watch. Let's see if they can fix them. I would say that basically nothing has been fixed so far.
Well, there's one thing. Let's say they have finally got rid of Sanchez between the sticks, which you must be glad about. Now, whether Jorgensen could have done better for at least 2 of the goals in this game is a question mark. But Sanchez was a huge problem in both in stopping shots, stopping chances, and obviously in their build-up play. So getting rid of him does at least feel like it's going to give them some benefits in the longer term. They also have brought back Chalaba, which I think is a player we like. Obviously didn't have a very good game on the day, neither did Levi Colwill. But Colwill and Chalaba are 2 youngish. I guess Colwill's 21 and Chalaba's, 24, 25 now. But these are 2 defenders who know each other and who I think we rate kind of highly. So there are some parts here that are very good.
Well, there are parts that you want to ask questions about, right? Because Chalaba looked rock solid at Crystal Palace. And yes, he was part of Palace's run that gave them the best team run they've ever had in the Premier League. And then he's gone, and they've struggled a bit in different situations as well. So he was excellent there. This weekend, a little bit tricky. The first match he had was kind of man of the match performance. Was it against Wolves though? So a little bit soft and squishy. Although to be fair, there are players that have struggled against Wolves this season too. Levi Colwill, I think, is the trickiest one. I thought that he was really quite good last year, and he looked like he was on the cusp of a potential call up for England as like a regular left back, although I'm sure that is the lad from Newcastle now. So Lewis Hall, who was also owned by Chelsea at that time. Ian Mason was also owned by Chelsea at that time. They had lots of options. But the reason why we have to ask some questions here is because they're struggling consistently now when previously under past head coaches, it didn't look like they struggled and it looked like they were consistently going to be good. I think that comes back around to some Maresca elements. I think that changing the goalkeeper can also have some impacts there. I was digging out and I put some stuff in our Slack today about goalkeeper distribution. And I wanted to look at Ederson, and then I wanted to look at Sanchez, because those two are sort of Pep style possession teams. Like Maresca allegedly has that. And then I wanted to look at Raya, who also is sort of from that similar-ish coaching tree. I don't think they're identical, but like, and of the lot, like Raya has about the same passing percentage completion as Sanchez. But what you can see is like a lot more kind of dangerous balls out into the wide spaces, because I think Arsenal have continued to create overloads on long balls into the wide spaces, where Chelsea weirdly have a bunch of stuff that comes central. And I have to wonder if that's like a Nico Jackson into like a Cole Palmer, like 2-man game or something like that. Or they try and create a 3-man overload, but almost none of that seems to succeed. Raya doesn't do that at all. And then you have Ederson, who continues to be the best distributor of the ball, possibly in world football, as a like from a getting going perspective, right? Like he's great at the long ball. He's great at finding these 1v1 matchups, either from Haaland or Marmoush. He had an assist this weekend. So like he has the most valuable kicking skill set of, I think, any of the goalkeepers that we see. And then obviously he's been pretty good at stopping shots, despite the fact that City have not always been particularly good at setting him up to succeed. So looking at that, I'm like, all right, so this is a change. Like, but if we continue to see the same pattern, then the question becomes like, is this a patterns problem? Is it a systemic problem? If the center backs are struggling, it's definitely a systems problem, because we've seen these guys succeed elsewhere. And I don't know, like these were things that we cared about earlier, that we warned about as like, I'm not convinced. And now it's kind of come back, and how bad is it is the next question.
Yeah, I think, it's that classic thing, right? Of like, one defender kind of looks bad, then you say maybe that's his problem. But if all the defenders are simultaneously looking considerably worse, this is a coaching issue. I mean, in this game, Cucurella as well had a particularly poor match. And when you think about that first Minte goal, he could have just gone down and got a penalty if he wanted, but stayed on his feet and kind of drills it in. But it just feels like the defensive issues start further up the pitch than that. I mean, look, their underlying numbers are a little bit better than the actual numbers. They've got 9 points from their last 9 games. They've got a -5 goal difference in that time, but their expected goal difference is +2, so a little bit better. But you're still looking at, what's that, plus 0.2, 0.25 XG difference per 90 minutes, which is not Champions League quality by any means. Defense is 12th best in the league since mid-December. And Billy Carpenter, who's this Arsenal tactics writer that I really enjoy, he pointed out that most teams will allow one player who's a bit of a passenger out of possession. Some managers will allow 0, like Mikel Arteta. But Chelsea often feel like they have 4 or 5. And in this game, they had a very low PPDA. So they were attempting defensive actions every 6 passes or so. But it feels like it's still not quite coordinated. It feels like it's still quite easy to play through. Or, of course, play over the top of, as with the Mitoma goal.
That's the thing. I don't actually think that Chalaba got skinned on that one too much. Like, it just looked like basic perfection. He was there the entire time, and magic was created. But the other ones are suffering, and Cucurella deserves a lot of blame for that. Like, Cucurella has been up and down. Their fullbacks in particular have been up and down, I think, a lot of times too. So it's not just on the center backs. And then they have 2 guys that should be great defensive midfielders in Caicedo, who was great for the first half of the year, and Enzo Fernandez, who has been great for other teams, right? Like, what are these guys actually supposed to be doing? Like, what are the roles? How do you fix it? Why are the wings not playing in that way? Like, yeah, maybe you can have Cole Palmer as like a roamer in the middle, a little bit like Foden has been historically in the past. So you can give him some freedom, but like, they've got to be able to shut down the other team. And as you say, if you have a high PPDA, but it's not coordinated systemically, like on a like, everybody needs to step up when the cover shadow is there, so that you narrow the passing lanes, so that it's much harder to complete those balls, and then you can get the press regains and go back the other way. If you're not doing that, then you're actually creating harder jobs for your teammates, because suddenly, like, you've given up more chances to be able to be in the right spots as opposed to having a body that's sitting in a block. The one thing that Arsenal do really well when out of possession, especially when they've got a lead, is they'll sit in a tight 4-4-2 and they will really shut down teams coming at them in the middle section. So they're not as deep as a Dyche. They're not as deep as a classic Moyes. And the reason why is because that helps you blow things up further away from the goal so that if something wrong happens, you've got more people behind that to be able to challenge. There are different styles of defending. Chelsea look a little bit out of sorts in their players. They look a bit out of sorts in their defending. And I think that some of their defending is now costing their attack a bit as well.
I wonder if some of that goal kick stuff as well can be adjusted to help this. You know, with Arsenal, like Arsenal love creating from those wide areas, and that's partially a defensive strategy as well as an attacking strategy, right? Like you pin back fullbacks and wingers, it's harder for teams to get out. And if you kick to those zones, then if the other team get it back, you can box them in against the touchline, and it's harder for them to kind of kick return.
Brentford love that.
Yes, exactly. So did Bournemouth. And but with Chelsea,
you remember what they used to do with Wenger? Like Wenger used to have at least one leaper, one fullback leaper on either side, and that guy would be one of the targets because they would push the other guys up so that if they wanted to do fullback versus a winger, then the fullback should have a good matchup on a 1v1, and they would know to collect the ball. There are different ways to do these long balls, and these long balls are more valuable now than they have been in the past because teams are pressing teams very high, and so your basic build-up play has to have other options. These adjustments are really interesting. I think the coaches are coaching harder than they have this year in almost any time that I can remember because there's so many different styles that create difficult matchups for teams. Sorry, go ahead with the build-up though on Chelsea.
No. I agree. Like everybody's kind of having to earn their money this season, right? But no, it just feels like if Chelsea are going to launch balls through the middle, then they either need to have a very reliable target they're launching those balls to, or they need to have a really robust kind of box of players who are going to close in on the opposition when the ball drops to an opposition player and have a plan for, winning the second ball. But instead it feels like they launch the ball to you and you just get the ball back.
Or partly
just go against Chelsea.
Partly the reason why you have to launch the ball is because you kicked it up a bit and now it's immediately come back to your goalkeeper. And everybody's out of position in order to be able to handle an overload ball because you were trying to get into your build-up setup. And so you don't have the structure to be able to do that. If you're too wedded to your philosophy right now, like teams will break that. They will find ways in order to force you out of it. And then your B plan or your C plan are often garbage because you haven't trained it enough. And so I think that if you're not flexible and adaptive in this league this year, you're going to, I don't want to say you're going to drown, but you're certainly going to struggle to stay afloat in the positions that your talent says that you should be.
Yeah, and now they've got Nick Jackson out for 6 to 8 weeks with this hammy issue as well, which is obviously a huge loss for them because what's been keeping them afloat, that attack, the defense has been middle of the league this season, but the attack has been
it's in with a block of other teams, right? Like let's not be too harsh on them. There's like Arsenal and Liverpool. And then there's like a chunk of other teams that are there, like Forest get to that number by doing different stuff. Then Chelsea get to that number. City used to be up in this range, but they've been so gaseous in different ways that they're not there this year. Although very, very good, like spectacular game against Newcastle this weekend.
Yeah, gave up 3 shots and kind of played. Well, I guess we could talk about that because they score a goal that's kind of similar to the Mitoma goal in a way, like obviously results in something bigger, but again, it's a similar thing, right? Like they know that Newcastle are going to want to make the game disgusting and unplayable in the center of the park. So they say, let's just avoid the center of the park. Like
I adore what they can do with Marmoush, Haaland, and Ederson right now. And I adore it for 2 reasons. One, because they now have 2 guys that are super challenging, and teams have been so focused on doubling Haaland, usually with 2 center backs, because they want the strength element of it, and usually one of your center backs is fast enough. So they'll double Haaland. Fine, double Haaland. Now you get Marmoush 1v1 on a fullback. You're drawing dead on that one. That he's a bad matchup in every single way for a fullback. Now, if you have a fullback pairing that also has a center back, maybe in some cover, then you can handle him. But the only way you can do that on both of those guys is to be able to like split your back line, which is also terrifying if the ball comes through the center, right? And that was something that the City have been good at. So I love that combination because Ederson is so good. And if you don't press Ederson, that gives him time to pick out either one of those guys and read whether they've got a mismatch. Then you get the fallback plan where if they're actually playing in a way that nullifies the center backs, or sorry, the two attackers, now you can do your build up normally as Pep has done for 15 years, and that's been the most crucial way that they're able to do it. They finally have a way to get good build up because they create mismatches across everybody else's back line with these two awesome forwards.
And it's just this is the secondary advantage, right? I think there was something again that you might have written probably about 10 years ago about the way that great players kind of drag other players into their orbit. And I'm not saying that Marmoush is, not a really good player, but Haaland, by having a guy who is such an enormous goal threat, you have a guy that teams can't ignore. And it means that when he moves, he drags teams with them, as you see, I think, for the hat-trick goal, right? Where he drags a couple of defenders with him and suddenly Marmoush is free for...
It's incredible. You can see him sneak. He's like a mouse that's coming in on the backside. You watch that from one angle and you see Haaland just kind of like peg himself towards the far post. Two center backs go with him. And then just behind him, there's a sneaky little dude that happens to be the fastest guy in the pitch that happens to go directly into the center of the box and nobody's near him for a cutback. You're like, that is the best sort of buildup that you can possibly get. And he's going to create problems for defenses all the time. Now, they will adjust, right? But when they adjust, that means that Haaland gets to go back to being a monster because like you can't overplay him constantly. Or somebody like Foden gets to go back to saying, hey, there's so much attention on the two center forwards. Now I get to sort of be the spoke in the middle of there, play off of either of those guys, depending on which side we think is weaker. And then take advantage of that. Now, City's problems is still in defensive, and they managed to shut down probably the best center forward in the league this year in Ishak, who'd been on an incredible run of form. But that it helps getting an early goal and having them have to come out of their shell and be able to attack you, as opposed to sort of fending off all of your attacks and then getting their own center forward in mismatches.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how they do down the stretch as well, Newcastle, because as we said before, they have been stomping the last couple of months, but it's not a deep squad, and it's an extremely energy intense style of play. So it'll be interesting to see whether they can sustain. But I also want to see, this City team play against a team that can hold the ball against them. That'll be a different sort of challenge. So
they still got a Champions League match in the midweek.
I cannot wait. I'm so excited. Shall we talk about Spurs United then? Because that was City, Newcastle, two teams coming in good form. Spurs United, it's one of those things where no matter how many times I read that they were like 13th and 15th or whatever they were, it makes me laugh with delight every time I look at the table. That now that
for those of you podcast listeners who are fans of these teams, Patrick does not speak for all of us.
This is the way that football works. We all know that football is a game that is entirely about Schadenfreude. And look, Everton are catching up to these teams. Spurs have lost, I think, 13 games in the league. United lost 12. This game, lived up to the billing in that it was exactly as messy and incompetent as you'd expect. Yeah. It was a disgrace.
There were some spectacularly hard shots. I was noticing this. Like I'm watching this and I was like, wow, that was fizzed right at the goalkeeper. Fizzed again. Goalkeeper makes a good saves. Like I think Vicario came off the bench directly into, he hadn't been playing lately. He'd come back from an injury. And then suddenly he might have broken fingers because Garnacho hit the ball so hard so many times at him.
Yeah.
But that was actually what led to the Maddison goal, right? So there was a Son look cross-ish, but probably was a shot, gets deflected. Bergvall gets that one. Onana has to make a save, and the rebound is so soft that Maddison is able to finally sort of follow up. But there were 38 shots in this game. That's a lot. There was like over 3.5 expected goals, which you kind of expect because Spurs seem to be dominant. And I want to say as a relative neutral, I appreciate the fact that they refuse to let their fans be bored. Spurs games are going to be entertaining for somebody, maybe not for their own fans. Maybe it's just for neutrals who like to see, the ball go up and down the pitch a bunch. But, I wish more teams were committed to that type of dedication. Like, just give us some fun when we're watching our 4:30 p.m. Sunday matches between the 13th and 15th place teams in the league.
And I mean, like, look, Amorim is not going to deliver the funds, so somebody's going to have to, right? But it's Spurs. There's not really a new thing to say here, right? In that Spurs just can't control a game. Like they were a goal up for 5/6 of the game. They ended up with about 2.2 xg, but they gave up 16 shots and 1.5 xgs, that United attack. Also a thing that stuck out to me about that, obviously these are just counting stats and like blah, blah, blah. But United completed 2 dribbles in this game. Both of them were Zirkzee. And I thought it is funny that at no point did anybody have to get past his man in order to create a goal-scoring opportunity.
That is actually brilliant.
That is kind of funny. But like, actually, I thought Zirkzee had a pretty good game doing Fellaini shit in the middle of the field. He was pretty good. But
we thought he was signed to do Fellaini shit. Honestly, like I was like, that's what he does, right? He's able to be very large and pretty quick. And Amorim talked about him losing some weight. He's like, he's getting faster and he plays more as a giant 10 now. So I'm intrigued by that bit. What do you make of Amorim's, of the backlash that started sort of immediately?
I mean, what part of it? I saw something about the subs, because obviously he brought on one sub in the 91st minute, which was Chido Obi Martin. But just about the fact that they've got worse since he took over.
To be fair, they have fewer players available. They have had the epidemic of injuries that has hit most of the Premier League has circled around to Manchester United. So they already didn't have a deep squad. They started the year without like Lenny Yoro and stuff like that. They've had players in and out. Ahmad, who has been their best player during the wintertime, is now out for probably the rest of the season. It's just like there's no good news at all for Manchester United, and they can't even chop and change because like there's nothing to change right now. Like they're just like, yeah, okay. And somebody said twofold. Like, first of all, he's not made them any better. Like, fine. If you've been watching our podcast or reading our newsletter, you knew that we didn't really expect them to be better. We expected them to be pretty bad throughout the rest of the year. And then the other thing is somebody was like, I'm sure that he would take a payout for the rest of the year and to go find a different team as quickly as possible if someone would let him out of his contract.
Yeah. This was already a conversation in the Slack, right? Just like, how does it change our perception of a smart manager if they are dumb enough to take a job in this situation? But I don't know. Look, they're not going to get relegated. For all the talk about that, it's not happening. It's like, yeah, okay. It's like tiny.
My preseason prediction would have loved that so much. Like so much. For those of you who don't know, back in August, I said the market implied model has Manchester United more likely to be relegated than it does for them to finish in first. And it's getting close on like second as well. So that was, and it looks like it might have been right.
But this game, if you want to get a sense of this game, if you didn't catch it, then there are 2 things I can point you towards. Go and look at the XG race chart for this game, and also look at the number of tackles that Man United attempted and completed in this game. They attempted 45 tackles in this game, and they completed 32 of them. And what that suggests, right, is there are a lot of possessions in this match. And when you look at the race chart, it's like basketball. It's like this team goes and has a shot and they go up a bit, and this team goes and has a shot and they go up a bit. And that was the whole match. So, yeah, I don't know.
Midfields are overrated. Midfields are overrated.
Apparently so. But I don't know. We'll see what comes of this. Amorim had Lindelof was his only senior player on the bench. So, like Ted says, there's not a great deal of hope coming down the pipeline for Manchester United.
The player that you just assume has already moved to Galatasaray, but it happens to be at Manchester United right now.
They've got so many of those guys. But anyway, Spurs and United still having a really, really troubling time. Spurs at least have got some fitness coming back, and at least when everyone was fit, they were kind of motoring for a minute there. But United just get through the season and God, you have to sell to buy. I can't be positive about this. It's too miserable.
we're not going to talk about INEOS stuff, but Kim did a little write-up last week in the newsletter about a couple of different columns that really went to town on INEOS and Omar Barada and Ratcliffe seemingly being out of money, which then sort of explains like all of the firings and things like that. So I think that's intriguing. Like we don't have any insight on it, but I thought that was interesting and fits in line with the sort of crisis in Manchester. That people thought would get better, and a year later looks like it's worse than ever.
I don't even know. They're not even going to be able to fix the roof on the stadium, Ted. Like, they've got no money. It's great. Okay. Moving on from there, then, because I thought it would be funny just to touch on Arsenal's brand new number 9 solution. They just picked the guy in the squad who looks like the most like Kai Havertz and put him up front. I mean, look, Mikel Merino came on. Arsenal had a horrific first half against Leicester.
It was so bad.
It was rancid.
I actually felt bad for Raheem Sterling. Raheem does not have the motors that he used to. He used to be the quickest guy on the pitch, not necessarily the fastest guy, but he used to be the one that had the best acceleration. He runs like a T-Rex. I understand, but like it was always very exciting to see the ball come to his feet. But he's been playing high-level football since age 16 in the Premier League, and he's not a big dude. At some point, your body seems to give in, and it might be at this point his body has kind of given in, despite the fact that his contract is certainly not giving in. That's also very weighty, which might be what's slowing him down.
Yeah, I think he's still on. I think Chelsea is still on the hook for about 40 mil that they owe Raheem Sterling. So Arsenal fans, at least he's going at the end of the season, I guess. Chelsea fans, it's going to be a while.
See, that's the thing. Like when you make loans like this, and so there were so many arguments for Arsenal loans. Like you did the Havertz show, and I wasn't on that one. So, and for the person who's tired of us talking about Arsenal, guys, they're in second place, and they continue to have news cycles. We're going to talk about Arsenal pretty regularly. But so getting away with a loan in that situation is fine. But the Sterling loan looks like that. So all the other players that you wish you might have loaned could also look exactly like the Sterling loan. You don't necessarily know that. People are like, oh, Colomwani. I don't think Colomwani wanted to come to England. I think that he was very happy to go get shots in Italy, potentially score some goals. Who knows? Their options were not great. They sat on their hands. I had been saying all along, I didn't think there was a lot of cash in the wintertime. And actually I read along the profile from The Athletic that sort of gave insight to all of Arsenal's dealings that felt like it was sort of a club-fed thing. And there was just one line in there that was basically like, they didn't like their options on older players. They also didn't like any of the options on younger players, but they were definitely going to get involved in that. I was like, all that tells me is that they didn't have any money that they wanted to pull the trigger on. That's all that's telling me. So not having money, you've got to scramble when on a rest and relaxation tour, your center forward happens to be doing whatever he's doing and tears a hamstring for the rest of the season.
Yeah. But
and then,
doesn't matter because
midfielders is number 9. That's gets rid of that whole first half, like big palate cleanser. It's like a pear sorbet with Mikel Merino.
He's good, man. Like, I mean, the first goal it's like a very Merino-y goal where he just kind of goes between the fullbacks. And I think you had something in the newsletter about pressure on crosses. And certainly this fits into the bill where Nwaneri is like right in the corner of the box and just kind of has time to float one in between the centre backs. And Merino is absolutely bananas in the air, so he's obviously going to finish that. The second goal, though, I was really impressed by because
nice little finish. Opens his body, opens his hips.
Leicester defending. Like, let's just put that out there because they had like 6 guys back and nobody thought to mark the only Arsenal player that Trossard could possibly pass to.
He's not a center forward.
It's a really nice finish.
You don't expect it from the non-center forward. Like, he's just a midfielder out there.
I was amazed he kept up to the attack, but a couple of goals for him, good for him, and also Nwaneri. He had like 0.8 expected goals and assists and 6 of 7 dribbles in this game. I mean,
every time that kid lines up a shot, that happens very quickly and it just flies off of his foot. I vote that we nickname Merino the Land Shark. Are you familiar with that skit?
No.
Okay, so it's an old school skit from Saturday Night Live, which just turned 50, and he would like ring the doorbell. And he's like, land shark. Like, what's a land shark? Never heard of a land shark. It's a shark on land, and then he would eat people when they would open the doorbell. And then eventually they were in on the joke and like, oh, you're a land shark. No, ma'am, I'm just a dolphin. And And basically, it's like the fact that he's a midfielder, sort of, disguised as a center forward. I think he can get away with just being like, "Oh, I'm no threat. Don't pay any attention to me. I'm fine. I'm just gonna hang out in and around the box." And the center backs are like, "Oh, that's a midfielder. I don't need to cover him. He doesn't even have the right number on. There's no 9 on his back. Come on, this is fine. This is the way." So I think he's a land shark.
He's a little Basque midfielder. What's he gonna do? Oh wait, he's
kind
enormous.
of a big Basque midfielder. Yeah. Like Arteta might be in a little Basque midfielder, I guess.
He's trying to bring in another one at the moment. Like it's all about the Basque midfielders.
Was it you or Kim that said if you give Arteta another 5 years, the entirety of Arsenal squad are going to be Basque players and players from the Highland?
I think it might have been Ravi. I think Ravi popped back in because every now and then, just like any Spanish person with like an X or a K in their name is currently linked to Arsenal. So it feels like we're just gradually trawling all of them out of the Basque country.
Manuel Chocolade. With an X.
Yeah, exactly. Shall we? Okay. Some people are annoyed with us about going on about Arsenal.
How dare we talk about Chelsea first? That's what I say. Okay.
Shall we make it up to them by doing an apology tour for our Everton takes? Because we were both pretty negative about them sacking Dyche, and they've won a lot of games. They've taken 13 points from 6 in the Premier League since Moyes came back, and they're going to stay up comfortably.
I'm so irritated. But I'm irritated for reasons that are borne out by the numbers on the screen. So we have these trend lines, and they show like when the old manager was there, when the new manager came in. Like, it's the same 9. It's the same. It's the same. They're not any better. They just have better results. But yeah, sometimes that makes you look like an asshole. So I'm sorry, David Moyes, and to Everton higher-ups who didn't really make almost any signings in the January window. You managed to roll nothing but 6s the entire time for the last 3-4 games. And now you have more points, or as many points as Crystal Palace.
They are at least using some guys they signed previously. Like Lindstrom, for example, is playing a lot more. He's played like half his minutes in the last 6 games, half his minutes for the season, I mean. And he should have been a Dyche guy because he's like he's a big guy, but he's mobile and he kind of floats between attack and midfield. But they've had a tough run, like Brighton, Villa, Spurs, Liverpool. And the only really bad performance in these last few games has been the Palace one. And even then, is it bad, or would they just was it a game state thing?
They got a free goal.
They did get a free goal.
It's just like, I'm going to throw a throw in. And then suddenly it's at the Everton attacker's feet. Like Palace was like, the Palace guy that threw it in is like pointing at the teammate. Like, what are you doing? Like, you're the one that threw it, you idiot. What's going on here?
But you assume if it ends up putting Beto through on goal, historically, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But Beto has got 4 goals from 2 XG at the moment. So he's the most lethal finisher in the league, I guess, right now.
I have to give a very caveated I'm sorry to all the Everton fans because, yes, unfortunately, you are scoring lots of goals and winning lots of matches like you did before. And to be fair, they seem to have more license to attack a bit. And that is how you get 3 points as opposed to 1 consistently, which is what Dyche was doing. But also, like, I'm not sure this run's going to continue. Like, none of the things say that they're getting any better in any of the phases, and they're also quite injured.
Well, I think it can continue in the sense that we thought they were better than their results under Dyche, right? Like we thought. So in that sense, it can settle at the level that their performances have deserved for the season. But yeah, they're not this good. But look, I'm fond of Everton. I think the Premier League would not be complete without Everton in it. Their fans have had a rough time over the last few years, and at least this should stabilize them a bit. And God, let's just hope that they can solidify, because
I really like some of the people up at Finch Farm too. I've been invited there a couple of times to talk to them. Like I think they've got some pretty good people that have worked through some very difficult, trying times. The only thing I'm looking at in this race chart here is the fact that, like, at the beginning of the year when Dyche tried to play more fun, like the number for expected goals conceded is way up here on the screen. It's very, very bad. Yeah. And then finally he tightened everything up and it goes way down here. And that's where Moyes took over. Basically, he equalized the attack and the defense by making them much more defensive, because the attack was just not firing either, or it was firing, but it was leaving them so open. Yeah, I don't know. Like I'm curious to see what the Friedkins do. The verdict from Roma has not been particularly cogent. I feel like they haven't been very consistent. They've done lots of things, and like they had a path and they jerked them the other way, which feels very Italian, but not American owners in Italy. So we'll see what happens with Everton, whether they're able to start to build from a good base and improve. Congratulations to them.
Yeah. And Everton fans, don't get carried away, because to me, the history of the Everton is things go well. Everton fans start to talk about ambition, and it starts to be, we've got to keep these players and we've got to push on. And maybe it used to be we can get in the Champions League, and then you hire an expansive manager and you open things up and you get crushed. So I think for now, the league is super competitive.
Do you remember Carlo Ancelotti worked there one time?
That is one of the craziest things that ever happened in football.
I have a question for you before okay. we wrap. I have one more football question. I'm trying to ask Patrick more questions because he also is very knowledgeable. Liverpool fans, should they be a little concerned? Like there was a draw midweek in the Merseyside, which was a hell of a lot of fun to watch, and then nearly gave it away against Wolves, 2-0 being the most dangerous lead.
Yeah, so the Merseyside derby ends up being basically level on XG. It's kind of like just under 1 apiece, right? And Everton, they looked pretty gassed in that one. And then this game, no shots in the second half against Wolves, but with a 2-goal lead, and Wolves aren't necessarily a team that you get too scared by. It would give me a slight cause for concern, but we don't have a lot left of the season. And if I'm Slot, then right now I probably am trying to organize things right to give my team as much walking time as possible, I guess.
Yeah.
But your worry is that it's something. Look, they didn't lose the game against Wolves. It took kind of an amazing goal to equalize in the Merseyside derby. They could easily have come out of those games with 6 points. They could easily come out of those games with 2 points. They're going to be fine in the league. I wouldn't get too worried about it. But I don't know. If I were a Liverpool fan, I'd worry about maybe going too hard in the Champions League if this is how things are looking now. Because Salah, he's at 37 goal involvements in the league now?
Yeah, but he's played a lot.
He's played a lot, and that's like equaling Cristiano Ronaldo, like best ever league tally. He's old, and he's magic, but he's not like that kind of magic. He's not like eternal magic. So you're going to have to find a way to get him some rest before the end of the season.
Think how much fun it would be, though, if they had to chop and change and then like put somebody else in Salah, and then Darwin comes into the starting lineup for the rest of the season. That'd be fun for everybody, right?
Yeah, and I think there are lots of games where they could use that. If you're kind of pitching a no-hitter in the second half against Wolves, this is exactly the circumstance where you're like, Darwin will do something.
Our friends over at the Enfield Wrap are not going to be happy with us. They're going to feel like we're jinxing the shit out of this team. Like they're like, now you've said there's going to be a Salah injury, and we're going to have to deal with Darwin in the squad every match in games that matter.
Liverpool are unjinxable. Liverpool can't be jinxed. I don't know. It wouldn't worry me too much, but they've got a tough run coming up. They've got Man City next week, and that'll be an interesting one because I think they've got City, they've got Villa coming up. They've got Newcastle in there as well, though that's at Anfield. Those games, you could easily drop 4 points in those games, and suddenly the league is, you're still heavy favourites, but you can no longer like afford a fuck up. So
the team that has no strikers on their squad anymore.
Yeah, sure, okay, but we'll see how it goes. We'll see how
you tried to talk yourself into that one so hard.
Yeah, that is the problem. The problem is that it's Arsenal behind them. Like if City, I guess we're so used to City being there as well, but I don't really see it happening. It's more that I think
City are 16 points back. I think that they're safe.
It's more that I think Liverpool could end up in a situation where they're like, oh, we can't devote resources to the Champions League now because we can't afford a fuck up in the league.
Well, they conveniently bowed themselves out of Plymouth. And they're like, no, FA Cup, you go ahead. That's fine.
Always an underrated path, right? Which is just like the two options in the cups that are good are go through in the cup, go out in the cup. Never go to extra time. The replay days, thank God those are behind us. Just never do any of that shit.
That's spoken like such a Premier League fan, by the way. Like
I know I'm such a like against modern football arsehole, but
it's like when Marcotti and I talk, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I forget that you follow leagues that are like not the top leagues. I can't. That's not even football to me anymore." I was like, "You met me when I was at Brentford. What are we talking about here?" Anyway,
only champagne football for Marcotti. Okay, that brings us to an end for this week, I think. Like I say, do stick around for the B-roll because it's a really juicy one this week, and as I say, there's something interesting coming down the pipeline there. We really do appreciate having feedback from all of you on the hosts that we've been trying out. Like we say, we're going to be using those guys in future, and make sure that you get your questions in. If you don't want to hear us talk about a certain team, send us a question about another team. There's loads of interesting stuff. Brentford are now apparently winning away games, which I didn't know was allowed. So send us something about that or about European football, and we'll endeavour to answer it. Ted, this is your last appearance for a couple of weeks. You're off on holiday next week, yeah?
yeah, I got Miami and then Austin. It's sort of a working holiday, but I'm so desperate for some sun that definitely looking forward to that.
So if you're in Miami, catch Ted and ask him about set pieces. And we will catch you here on the podcast. Make sure that you subscribe to the newsletter. Make sure that you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app, and we will catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. So Patrick and I are going to probably launch a real podcast around this type of stuff because I think we really care about it more than we expected to.
Non-football stuff. Non-football stuff.
It is, and I've been threatening myself and my friends with doing like a personal newsletter, and part of that's like dating stuff because my friends pay attention to the dating stuff. Like my male friends are I don't know what your male friends are like. My male friends are a disaster. Like they don't really get in touch with each other. Like you chat with them like once every 6 weeks to briefly. Like the gamer friends are a little bit better because you can get together and play games. But
Sure, yeah.
and then like some people still have their college friends on like a group chat. Some people chat on the group chat on about sports, right? But don't chat about anything real. And it's pretty unusual. Anyway, so we're going to do this for real. I'm warning people about it. But the reason why we're going to do it for real is we've been talking. So please, it is a good lead off is the movie that you were just describing.
But yeah, another round, the Mads Mikkelsen movie. So I was just saying to Ted that this is a good film. It's a film about a bunch of guys who decide to take a little bit of alcohol every day to try and loosen them up a bit because they're stuck in ruts in their personal lives, in their working lives. But what actually this film consists of is a group of men who regularly meet for meals, who talk to each other when they are feeling down, who are vulnerable with one another, who are loving with one another, which is particularly, that's the unusual part. And when I watched this with my wife, I said to her, like, I can think of a dozen like female-centered movies where there is a group of women at the heart of it who interact with each other in this way. But I haven't seen a film about this with men almost ever. And when I saw it, it was a Danish film. It was not an American film. It was not a British film. And actually, look, I'm not the hugest fan of this film, but The Shawshank Redemption, it is interesting, right, that The Shawshank Redemption has become so beloved over the last 30 years, which is a film very specifically about two men who have like a loving friendship with one another. I think that's so unusual.
Yeah. And as I said, I think you and I care about this quite a bit. And I've wanted to talk about dating stuff in general because I think like one of the things the reason why this is the right time is because so much of what men see about dating and everything else is very bro culture centered and black pills, red pills, blah, whatever. Like I don't even like the words. But life doesn't have to be like that. And so yeah, I think it's the right time. And it's the right time. Like we're both pretty educated on this stuff. I've had to educate myself on this stuff. And so today, I'm going to talk about two funny things. Well, sorry, one funny thing and one very vulnerable thing. And if you're uncomfortable with it, I apologize. But like, I feel like this is the right space. And we're going to start to do this a little more regularly. And as you notice, like I could totally laugh at myself and my dating experiences if you've been on the B-roll in recent times anyway, because it is funny. Like it's very funny. So the first part and the funnier part is I was watching some sort of TikTok, and it was this woman who had taken over one of her friends, who was a boy or a man, her male friend's dating accounts. And she's like, I'm already sick of it. I've been on it 3 days, and like my self-esteem has dropped, and like it's just so frustrating. It's like this guy's a 6, and he's on there, and he's messaging women. He's trying to start things, and like I'm so desperate for interactions that like I'm liking like the 2s and the 3s, and like obviously numbers are not sensical ways of evaluating them, but they can give us a baseline. And obviously this is, numbers are my history. But so I was thinking about this, and then I started talking to either some of my ex-girlfriends or partners or the couple female friends that I have. And I was like, hey, when you're on dating apps, so I'm out here in the West Country, I'm not in London. Like London's like 8 million people. There's a lot of people that you can meet. Same for New York, Los Angeles, like big cities, like lots of people that you can meet. And dating at the end of the day and finding your partner is both serendipity and a numbers game. You need to create surface area to be able to meet them. And apps are one surface area, but meeting people in person is another. We're going to talk about that because that's a secondary thing that we'll do kind of when I come back from holiday. But so I was talking to women, and I was like, hey, on average, like during a normal week, how many connections do you get? How many matches do you get on like the different ones? And they were like, oh, it's really overwhelming. Like it's like, sometimes 50, sometimes 100 in a week. I was like, oh my God. And like any reasonably attractive woman is looking at this amount of matches, and they find it overwhelming. They're like, oh yeah, it's just tough. And then you get started with it, but then sometimes you lose the threads of where you're at, or like a different guy, or this or that or the other thing. And I was like, that's incredible, because, and then this is where the question started from me. I was like, obviously you know me, just from physical appearance, just from looks, what number would you give me on a scale of 1 to 10? And now let's say up front, this is biased because these are women that either have dated me or like me well enough, so whatever. But on average, it was about a 7. One woman said high 8, and I was like, you and I had way too much physical chemistry. I don't believe you. and another one or two said, like a 6. But again, so biasing upwards, let's say that I'm a 6.5, maybe even a 6, right? I get anywhere between 2 and 3 matches on a platform a week. Now, okay. I'm tall. I'm a 6.5 to a 7. I'm pretty wealthy. I'm moderately charming, especially in person. Funny, decent looking. I'm like all the things that people might want in a partner, but I'm 48. So like I am older, right? And that's also another issue. But they're getting anywhere between 5 to 20 times the matches in similar sorts of ranges as a woman to a man. And the reason why I even looked at this was because of this TikTok thing. I was like, oh, I want to pull on this thread. This is insane. And so now I want to pull on it a lot because like I feel like the apps might be horribly broken, and I am a systems person. So I'm like, what is the most effective way for me to do XYZ? And 2 years ago, many of you don't know, I don't talk about my personal life very much because I was running a company. It's a very uncomfortable thing, both for investors and for yourself and employees and whatever. So I have 2 long marriages. I've been married basically my entire adult life up until about 2 years ago. The first one was to a woman who is a lesbian in San Francisco.
Okay.
I feel like I deserve a bit of a bit of a pass on the divorce on that one. I feel like that can't really claim that one being entirely my fault.
That's a no foul situation.
Some people are like, oh, you've been divorced twice. It's like, well, there's a Ross from Friends situation on this.
There's an asterisk. Okay, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, she needed to go pursue her sexuality, and she has, past trauma from, upbringing that contributed to that, whatever. But it took her a long time because she grew up in the American South, and so that was not a thing that she could explore at any point. And actually, the place that I grew up in and the time that I grew up in, it was almost illegal to be gay. People won't know this, but like I've been a big champion of LGBTQ plus for a long time, like not least because my ex-partner was, but also just because it was the right thing. Like even from a teenager, like I thought that was a big deal. But it wasn't a huge cause back then outside of, HIV and stuff like that, different time. So that's my first one. And then my second one was a long marriage. We have 3 kids. We're pretty good at co-parenting now. We have a pretty good relationship around that too. And then 2 years ago, like I came out into the world, and when I last dated, we not only didn't have apps, we didn't have smartphones. Like the iPhone was just about to be released, and so it was this kind of overwhelming world. And the reason why I mentioned being a systems person is because usually I could figure things out and figure out how to twist things at least to make it efficient for me, figure out the path of sort of most reward, least friction. And the app stuff feels like it's just horribly broken for men. And to a lesser extent for women, because like if they're feeling overwhelmed, then it's broken that way too.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, I started pulling on this thread, and then the follow-up funny part is the women all just assume that my profile's terrible, which they're not entirely wrong. So now we have science. Now we have science involved. I should mention actually that there's another Ukrainian singles party happening in London on the 28th, and we'll put the link in the show notes for you to sign up. But the woman that runs those actually does for men and women. She does like dating profile updates, dating advice, dating courses, education.
Okay.
So it's like legit. And man, she was so scathing about my pictures. Like, why? Well, this is an insane picture. Why would you do this? And like, why are none of these things here? And I was like, this is after I worked on it a lot. And it's not that it hasn't been somewhat successful, because it has. I've had some lovely dates and met wonderful people. But their first assumption is that your profile must be terrible. And so we will, when come back from holiday, start to experiment with this and start to see, like, can we make it better? What is the more optimal? Because I am good at marketing. I have a long history of understanding how to market things. But one of the keys in marketing is you need to understand your audience or your customer. And the customer is women. And none of us can actually claim to understand women other than other women for some extent. And even then, they're like, nah.
But this is very funny because, like, I feel like even today, like you send stuff through in the Slack or via email that is notionally about growing the transfer flow, I think, and how we're building the future of the transfer flow. But now I'm sort of going over it in my head through the lens of how do we grow Ted's masculine footprint upon the earth?
Doesn't need to be my masculine footprint. See, this is the thing about I genuinely like women, and I feel like having an approach and being able to talk about these things with curiosity, with affection, with interest is important for young men, because it's important for the world, actually. Like, people need to keep breeding in order for humans to continue to have, like, a good lifestyle. So that's one side of it. And so I think Patrick and I at this point have sort of committed to running a regular podcast, and in some cases, like, I'll have a newsletter where we talk about this stuff. In some cases, we'll take questions. And for those of you who don't know, why would you be qualified for this, Patrick?
Well, I mean, I'm a therapist. I work as a therapist. So I see clients. In fact, I largely see male clients, because if you're a male therapist, you end up seeing a lot of men, but I see women too. And overwhelmingly, because I'm 35, I see young clients. And when you see young clients, you realize how lonely, how isolated people are, how damaging people's expectations of the world are relative to the reality, how much those things kind of keep them penned in to a particular way of living. And it is kind of heartbreaking, because there is a world of possibility, but it feels like people are restricted. And especially when you see the influence of social media. So, for example, I don't know about you, but I see loads of videos online where it's women being asked, how much does a man have to make in a year in order to date you, and stuff like this. And all of this feels like an engine designed to make
people feel
men
inadequate.
resent women.
Absolutely.
And that this is not good for anybody at all. So I think that this is something that I'm very passionate about. And I find the loneliness and the isolation among young men to be not only, of course, like sad and something that we can try and fix through therapy and connection with one another, but also it's an enormous political problem, as we can see by the rise of fascism literally everywhere. So,
and the funny thing is about the videos that you mentioned, I already made that money, like, and I'm still struggling. So like, it's not about the money directly. It's about everything else, and it's also about people's expectations. And we'll talk about romance, we'll talk about love, and we'll talk about expectations are sort of the one of the big issues in the downfall and the dissatisfaction with people's relationships. So we're going to do that. And we're going to do a couple of threads here. One, we're going to talk about dating. We're going to talk about the apps. We're going to improve my dating apps. And like, maybe we'll even have some people on to be able to do some guidance around that. Two, I'm going to start to show up in person. And I'm going to do things in person. So I'd already signed up for salsa classes. Like, I've had some of those. Like, those are Monday nights at 8:00, which is really hard after a long Monday. But like, get out for those a bit. But start showing up to social events where you can meet other people, and particularly women. And that's actually one of the things that some of the people in San Francisco were like, oh, I've had much better luck in meeting kind of friends of friends, or going out for sort of social dance experiences and then meeting potential dating partners that way. So that's another one. And it's not a drinky sort of, it is a learn to dance, feel uncomfortable, feel a little vulnerable, and then like sort of learn to be able to talk to people in that way. So I think that one's a pretty good one. Run clubs are another thing that people suggest. For men, they suggest showing up to Pilates and yoga classes because you're going to be unusual there. And you're not a creep. Let me tell you, like, if you're doing it for real, like if you're going to do it, and you should actually, the yoga is a big deal, then like, you know, there's totally legitimate like self-worth reasons for doing this anyway. You're just putting yourself in a situation where you're increasing the surface area for potentially meeting women that might be attracted to you or you might be attracted to. Totally valid reason. So yeah, we're going to do that. And we're going to pull on each of these threads, and then we're going to start to talk about it. And we're going to talk about things that like you might not have been introduced to, like, you know, attachment styles and love languages and pretty much everything that Esther Perel has ever done, because she's awesome. She's like a 67-year-old Belgian woman that is one of the smartest, most attractive women I've ever seen. So there you go. Right. So that's one side of that. The other side is I want to be a little vulnerable and talk briefly about me. And if you're uncomfortable with this, like, please duck out. It's totally fine. So back in October, I broke up with somebody that I'd been seeing for a little over a year at that time. And we had an amazing relationship, I thought. And I was the one that instigated the breakup. So, and there were reasons why, and they were valid, somewhat. And we didn't talk a lot after the breakup. A lot of people don't. Maybe we should have done more. I certainly see that now, but at the time, I don't want to get into all the details because like that's a little too uncomfortable. But like, again, there were valid reasons from my perspective that this was really challenging, and there were signs of it. And we had a lot of stress because we were trying to figure out potentially how to combine two different households with different kids and a lot of money to get a house. And like, there was just stuff, right? So anyway, broke that off. And then I went back out into the dating world and started dating and thought that like I was going to be fine. Totally thought I was going to be fine. Because it just felt like, oh yeah, I'm sort of chugging along and I'll find something else. And this was wonderful. And the breakup was, you know, I feel like the words that I used and the tone was with care, like no shouting at all, like always being affectionate, talking about what an amazing person she is. So like trying to make this as gentle as possible, but I feel like I'm not experienced at that because I had 2 long marriages. And so like, it wasn't like I had a slutty period where I got together and broke up with a bunch of people. I didn't have like a series of, 6 to 24 month relationships in my 20s, like most people did. Like I was married for a long block, and then I was briefly separated or divorced, and then I was married again pretty quickly, and then wanted to have kids. And those were good relationships. And from what I'm told, I'm a pretty good partner, but you can always do better. And I think at age 48, I'm probably the best partner that I've ever been. I understand more about how to talk about these things, which is also really big. And I try to push to be much more radically honest about this stuff, which I think is very challenging you would know this, but the two things that really submarine your self-worth inside of a relationship, or self-worth period, is being afraid of things or being ashamed of things. And talking about those things can help you get through both of them, because you're discussing them and making people aware, helps you work through it, helps you not either be afraid or potentially to work through the shame and be like, oh, how should I have acted? Like, how can I do better in the future? So obviously I could do better at breakups. I'm sure. I know this. Anyway, so park that. Started dating people. Nothing really particularly sustained. And then at Christmas time, I started to get quite kind of sad. And I thought that maybe it was the sun. I thought that maybe, my kids were gone from Christmas time. There were natural reasons for it. But I stayed that way through into January. And then I realized that like I had some undealt with issues with this wonderful relationship that I'd had. And I was like, well, I think I need to apologize. Even if I feel like I didn't treat her badly as part of that, I feel like I wronged her, and I would like to make apologies. I would like to find ways to make apologies. And at this point, she's kind of moved on and isn't super happy to hear from me. And like, I don't want to be a nag, but also I'm trying to deal with this stuff. And then fast forward like a couple of weeks later to last week, I realized that the ways that I've been talking about her and to her had never changed. Like even from the good times, like my emotions were pegged at, I'm in love with this woman and I would actually choose to live with this woman and potentially spend our lives together. And even when I broke up, like I know the reasons why I did it. And part of that was I was afraid of something, and part of that I was slightly ashamed of something, and also part of it was we were in conflict way more than we ever were, and I was also in conflict with other people in my life at that time, and like it was just too much for me. So like I freaked out and I ducked. But the realization that I was still in love with this woman was overwhelming. And in fact, since I was the one that broke it up, I broke my own heart, and I broke her heart too, and that continues to feel horrible. And I'm so sorry about that. I know that there's also some shine in that, like, I feel like the things that I was worried about at the time, I've now gotten past. They were valid before, but they don't seem as nearly as important now. But I couldn't sort of have that perspective at that time. But I've done the reading. Like, I don't feel like I'm a particularly avoidant person. And yet this is avoidant as fuck behavior. I broke my own heart. I broke her heart, and I did it in such a way, such a spectacular piece of self-sabotage, that because it was on a time delay, like I couldn't repair it and I couldn't fix it in a time that made sense or could make it better. And this is my personal experience from someone that's lovely, and she will go on with her life, and she will meet wonderful other people because she's a spectacular woman. I don't think she will have any interest in me. Maybe at some point we can be friends again. I'm not sure. But I wanted to talk about it because like it's a mistake, and it's a mistake that we can learn from. But also, you're always going to make mistakes, and I have some self-forgiveness that I got to do, like in here, because that's also brutal. Like, how often you see people just beating themselves up about something for ages.
And it often doesn't help.
It doesn't help at all, right? Like, can you learn from it? Sure. But do you need to use it as a stick or a rod to beat yourself with forever? No. And if you're going to date, you're setting yourself up to be hurt eventually. But the highs of that are so good. And also, like, maybe you married somebody and you have a 10, 20, 50-year marriage. And marriage is a very different life. And you and I both know this. It is also a lot of work with a lot of ups and downs. And there are times when you're just trying to survive, especially if you've got young kids. But yes, anyway, so that's me talking about my silliness in this relationship and my mistakes and my fuck up. And maybe hopefully my learning, probably need to talk to somebody about this because I did not realize that my avoidant tendencies could be that deep.
Well, look, you want to put me on the clock, then we could do. But it's it's your response to this to being avoidant in this moment was to has been to go out and double down on vulnerability, right? To go and put yourself in a position to go and meet more people. And it's like that. This is really pretentious, but
it's not pretentious. Use
but
the words.
the Proust thing of
no, it's pretentious.
Yeah. So the idea that if a little dreaming is a dangerous thing, then the only solution is to dream more, to dream all the time. This is how I feel about vulnerability. If a little vulnerability feels scary, then the solution is not to close yourself off and be less vulnerable, but to become accustomed to being vulnerable, to get used to it, and to do it as much as possible.
Well, and this is the thing about meeting people in person. This is why we're so scared, right? So first of all, you have to leave your house, which, people are like, oh, my house is comfortable. I have entertainment there. But second of all, somebody might turn you down in person. And the reality is, like, you might never see them again. It's not like high school where, like, oh, you meet somebody and, like, oh, they're there in your class every day. This is horrifying. They're going to tell their friends, whatever. Like, you meet somebody at a bar or a dance class or whatever, like, it's fine. You just move on. It's no big deal. But you have to be vulnerable in order to open the moment. Man, I was told by a couple of very attractive women that I dated in the past, like, I was terrified of meeting people in person. And they told me, it's like, if you came up to a bar, I'd be very receptive to it. And I was like, oh, that's an incredible compliment. Like, because I had no idea. Because we oftentimes, especially if you're kind of analytical, like, you don't know that people might be interested in you. Like, and I've dated autistic women as well who have sort of similar ways of thinking of it. And you're like, oh, that's scary. Yeah, I think the other thing, so yeah, you have to learn to be vulnerable. You have to learn to be comfortable with vulnerable. Like, the other thing that I'm not going to give up on being is romantic. Like, I think there's not enough romance in the world. And even in fact, how can you not be romantic about baseball? Like, our sporting elements are romance, right? Like, men love sport because they get to feel through it.
Yep.
Yeah. And feeling through the rest of life is okay too. And I've changed how I talk to my kids. Like, being an older dad is slightly dangerous with your kids and, like, meeting people. I don't introduce them to almost anybody, but I will talk to them as if I'm a real person, because I don't want them to see me as, like, dad bought 5,000. And I want them to just see me as, like, this role of person where, like, he doesn't have he's not real, or it's all hidden away. So yeah, like, when I'm emotional, like I was last week, I'm like, I'm really quite down. I'm sorry for that. Like, if you guys notice it, like, it's great. Like, maybe I need another hug or two. It's fine. And also, we're coming off of Valentine's Day. So, like, it's another good time to talk about that and to make people realize that, first of all, Valentine's Day is a made up holiday, but it can still make you feel bad. And it's not about the timing of that. Like, the Christmas time is also a brutal time to be alone. So yeah, I'm very sorry. I would love to make it up to her, but she doesn't want to hear from me, which is fine. I respect that. I'll stay out of the way. And that's, how to deal with these types of things respectfully, how to respect your partners better. Like, we can talk about all this stuff, and I think we should. I think we should create a weekly space where we can talk and men can listen to two men that genuinely love women, that are curious about women, that, like, want to power this forward, and also that can have emotions in a constructive way, in a productive way, about your friends, your family, your loved ones, potentially your dates.
I think in the end, it'd be nice for us to connect to some people and to help them to kind of connect with other people if we can. Like, at a certain point, we've got to put our money where our mouth is, right? And, like, show people a little bit of the stuff that maybe we would rather not.
Yeah. So I think you and I have been touching around this at times in the B-roll, and I think it's time to take the B-roll into its own main role. So give us a little bit. If you're interested, definitely mention it to us down below. And also, we can go back to being silly and ridiculous about football and the rest of the world, as opposed to being gently emotional and and therapeutic.
Well, I'll probably shed a tear of joy when we start talking about, some team I hate being terrible, but I guess we should get into it. Get into it. But it's nice. It's nice to talk about something else and remind ourselves that we are actually more than our interest in football.